We have never had more access to developmental psychology, parenting manuals, or child behavior experts. Yet, despite this unprecedented accumulation of knowledge, raising children has become demonstrably more difficult, generating a level of daily friction that previous generations rarely experienced. We've spent decades filling lecture halls, churning out academic theory, and codifying child development into a massive industry of advice. But this proliferation of expertise has consistently failed to translate into practical ease for caregivers. We also have fewer children to manage and historically high amounts of leisure time. Theoretically, these conditions should have radically lightened the burden of child-rearing. Instead, the resistance and exhaustion have only compounded. The root of this paradox lies in a systemic miscategorization. Modern culture began treating child-rearing as a technical skill set, a series of learned actions to be memorized and deployed. This error birthed a default reliance on behaviorist methods. We were taught to lean heavily on conditioning techniques, treating timeouts, withheld privileges, and logical consequences as the primary engines of adult authority. But if authority were simply a matter of acquiring the right knowledge and executing the correct behavioral techniques, the modern parenting crisis would not exist. The true foundation of relational authority isn't a learned skill, it is a biological reality. That foundation is explained by developmental attachment theory. It shifts the entire focus away from what a child does and places it squarely on who the adult is to the child. Biologically, attachment is the driving instinct characterized by the pursuit and preservation of proximity. It is the raw gravitational pull that binds human beings together. Human emotional attachment operates exactly like physical gravity. It is the evolutionary mechanism designed to keep an immature, vulnerable organism safe by tethering it to a mature, capable system. Behaviorism completely misses this architecture. It treats compliance as the goal to be engineered, ignoring that true cooperation is merely a symptom of a secure attachment structure. Without establishing this vital connection first, any behavioral intervention you apply is biologically programmed to fail. It simply lacks the gravitational pull required to anchor the child's behavior. The primary biological function of attachment is highly specific. It exists to facilitate dependence. Because it must facilitate dependence, the biological purpose of attachment automatically and involuntarily arranges individuals into a structural hierarchy. For the system to function, the adult must assume the caretaking alpha role, and the child must occupy the dependent, care-seeking position. After the Second World War, a cultural misunderstanding derailed this dynamic. We became hyper-focused on democratic values inside the home, prioritizing friendship and peer-like status with our children over leadership. But egalitarianism within a developmental attachment relationship is biologically incompatible. The system immediately becomes structurally unstable. Attempting to act as a child's equal creates a massive power vacuum. To survive the instability, the immature child is forced to usurp the alpha role, taking charge of a system they are completely unequipped to manage. This results in an alpha child. They display chronic dominance, dictating terms, issuing ultimatums, and operating with a fundamental inability to accept care or direction. True equality in child-rearing is a biological impossibility. Someone must lead the dance, and if the adult abdicates the alpha position, the entire structural system collapses into friction. So, what happens when an adult attempts to issue a command or enforce a boundary without being securely established in that alpha position? We apply coercive force upon a disconnected system. The adult pushes an agenda without the underlying structural connection to support it. The child's brain instantly generates counterwill, an automatic, equal, and opposite instinct to resist, block, and deflect the incoming command. Counterwill is not a character flaw. It is a vital, healthy biological defense mechanism. It is hardwired into the brain to prevent an immature human from being directed by someone they are not securely attached to. We frequently misdiagnose this resistance as willful disobedience, or oppositional defiance, or a bad attitude. In reality, it is a protective instinct working exactly as designed. This creates a devastating trap for behaviorist models. When adults apply even more coercive force to overcome the initial resistance, They simply trigger a proportionately stronger, more aggressive counterwill response. Chronic defiance is rarely a true discipline problem. It is almost universally a symptom of a weak attachment hierarchy, triggering the child's biological alarm system. Faced with a resistant child, the standard behavioral response is to escalate to contrived force, usually through timeouts or the removal of privileges. The mechanics of contrived consequences are deeply manipulative. They require the adult to actively discover what a child cares about and then weaponize that affection against them to force compliance. There is a profound psychological cost to having attachments weaponized over a sustained period. The brain cannot endure constant vulnerability being continually used as leverage. To survive the emotional pain of this constant separation and leverage, the child's brain executes a process called defensive detachment. The brain instinctively numbs their vulnerable feelings. An emotionally desensitized child presents an extreme danger to their own development. By shutting down vulnerability, they lose the capacity to experience attachment itself, rendering them completely immune to positive influence and entirely unparentable. Behavioral consequences may occasionally extract short-term fear-based compliance, but they structurally degrade the relationship, inviting severe, long-term emotional damage. The biological alternative to contrived force is developmentally safe discipline. If we define discipline by its root meaning, to impose order, we can achieve it without sabotaging the relational tie. Our first protocol is soliciting good intentions. Adults must stop reacting to poor behavior after the fact, and instead proactively impose order on the child's mind before an incident occurs. Getting a child to agree to a desired outcome shifts the adult out of the role of adversarial enforcer. It places you in the position of a collaborative coach, working alongside the child's stated aim, even when their impulses fail them. The second protocol utilizes the integration process. This targets the true biological nature of self-control. An immature child lacking self-control is driven entirely by a single, impulsive emotion. They are physically incapable of stopping their own momentum because there is nothing inside them pulling back. True self-control is never achieved by trying to suppress or cut out a bad feeling. It is achieved by adding a conflicting emotion to create mixed feelings, pairing frustration with a desire not to disappoint, which naturally stabilizes the behavior. The third protocol is adaptation. It applies specifically when a child hits an immovable boundary and encounters absolute futility. When a child realizes their demands will not be met, the adult must completely abandon logical arguments and demands for compliance. Instead, the goal is to gently guide the child toward the emotional experience of sadness. Sadness is the biological mechanism that processes futility into resilience. Therefore, developmentally safe discipline relies entirely on fostering emotional maturation rather than forcing behavioral suppression. Because the integration process requires years of neurological development, we need a mechanism to maintain order right now. We do this by imposing order on the environment rather than directly on the child. The modern absence of cultural rituals forces parents to engineer their own protective boundaries and daily structures, establishing rigid meal times, dedicated study zones, and strict screen time architecture. Relying on environmental structure entirely removes the adult from the role of commander-in-chief, barking direct orders. By letting the routine dictate the action, you effectively neutralize the triggers for counterwill. For highly immature children, we utilize behavioral scripting. Instead of vaguely demanding they act mature, we choreograph their behavior with specific, positive physical actions to perform in moments of friction. Environmental structure and careful scripting take raw, chaotic energy and give it a physical path to follow, organizing the turbulence without requiring internal maturity. These environmental tools are vital stopgaps. They buy the necessary time for the child's brain to naturally mature, preventing constant behavioral friction from eroding the attachment relationship. This brings us to the absolute non-negotiable rule of human development, the rule of context. Healthy authority only operates within a secure relational boundary. Every single intervention, every limit set, and every behavioral script must occur strictly within this established perimeter of connection. Compliance must be driven by an internal magnetic pull, not an external wall. The mandate for caregivers and professionals is singular and unwavering. You must actively collect the heart before you attempt to direct the mind. Attachment is the most powerful physical and psychological force in human biology. Cultivating this vital connection yields a natural, unforced authority that contrived behavioral systems can never replicate.